today, after many years, is a partner at Gianni Arrigoni, one of the main law firms in Italy. And he specializes in London in capital markets, in financial regulation, and he has a specific focus on derivatives transactions and derivatives markets. Marco is advising leading investment banks, insurance companies, local authorities, and institutional investors. And without, I think, taking further time, I think I will provide the floor to Marco Zaccagnini, who is our speaker of today for Italian Voices. And thank you again to accept our invitation and to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniele. Of course, I'm honored and truly happy to be here this evening. Now, since I'm not particularly fond of talking about myself, what I thought I would do is to take a slightly different approach, if that is all right with you. What I would like to do to make this conversation more meaningful and interesting is to place my personal experience within the broader context of the socioeconomic and political shift in the past 30 years, which would make quite an interesting story for our audience. So let me take you back to the world in 1995, when I arrived in London for my LLM at Queen Mary and Westfield College. As you correctly said, that's the way it was called back then. And of course, it was a very special and exciting time. Starting with the fun part, of course, Cool Britannia was in full swing back then. Oasis and Blur filled the airwaves. Young British artists like Damien Hirst and Tracey Emin were reshaping contemporary art. In politics, all eyes were on the opposition, Tony Blair and New Labour, promising a new era. In finance, neoliberalism was the new gospel. The watchwords were globalization, deregulation, liberalization, privatization, and fiscal discipline. The Washington Consensus was at its peak, and emerging economies, especially China, India, and Southeast Asia, saw unprecedented growth. Stock market soared, fueled by heavy investments in technology, while inflation remained low across developed economies. The internet and mobile technology were still in their infancies, but poised to transform entire industries. Capitalism and free trade were lifting millions out of poverty every year. Some believed that they held the key to solving all of humanity's problems, that we were witnessing the end of history. I'm not joking. The End of History was, of course, the title of a famous book by Fukuyama, which was in my reading list, in the reading list of my course of Law and Development. In the City of London, this era of optimism and deregulation had a precise start date, which was 1986. That year, the Single European Act, which had been adopted with strong British support, paved the way for a European free trade zone in financial services. That same year, Thatcher's government scrapped the old rulebook of the London Stock Exchange to promote the city as a global financial hub. It became known as the Big Bang. I remember Professor John Alton, who led Queen Mary's Banking and Finance LLM back then, recalling his surprise upon arriving from the US and discovering just how lightly regulated the British securities market was. American banks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, smelled opportunity and scrambled to boost their presence in London. Now, we've just to imagine the explosive mix when Wall Street ruthless, sophisticated money machine collided with a tradition-bound world built on trust and unwritten principle, as was the City of London back then. By 1995, The results were plain to see. London had secured its leadership in fixed income, equities, forex, and commodities trading. Alongside New York and Tokyo, it fueled the 24-hour global markets. Through the Eurobond market, it financed European governments and large corporations. Now, with hindsight, some cracks were already showing. Just before my LLM began, Nick Leeson, a trader from Watford, had brought down Baring Banks, founded in 1762 during the 7 Years' War. Using future, he had gambled the bank's money and hid losses until the bank collapsed under the weight of its derivatives book. As it turned out, few at Barings understood what he was doing or how futures even worked. Barings should have been a wake-up call, yet banks and lawyers in the city remained deeply skeptical of regulation. I remember that the prevailing comments were something like, the European Union shouldn't put a spoke in the wheels of a system that is working fantastically well. Regulators should focus on rogue traders, the occasional bad apple, and let the big players look after themselves. As long as there's liquidity and confidence in the market, all be well. My impression is that in those years, LLM programs in London mirrored the city's mood. They aimed to produce professionals who fit seamlessly into the industry, and Queen Mary really excelled at it. I'm not saying that there was a shortage of critics of neoliberalism in academia, but certainly they were not prevalent in my LLM classes, where most of the lecturers were eminent practitioners and the focus was on industry expertise rather than critical thinking. I don't blame them, thought. There was a genuine belief back then that what was good for the city was good for the world, and the results were under everyone's eyes. I recall a lecture by Philip Wood, a legend in the field, a classmate smarter than I was. I remember that challenge him, asking him, isn't all this leverage in the system dangerous? Could the booming securitization of bank loan foster reckless lending and inflate a bubble? His concerns were acknowledged, but gently dismissed. I have my note of his response that I scribbled down on the margin of one of his textbooks that I photocopied. And he said something like, in common law jurisdiction, commercial law has been the springboard of the Industrial Revolution over the last 2 centuries, and is a marvelous product of human ingenuity. Banks and corporations are commercial law's favorite children. They put bread on the table and a roof over the head for billions of people. They should be an enabler rather than a guardrail. It may not be verbatim, but this is the note that I took. Of course, I found all the discussion back then utterly fascinating. So the LLM, I think that what really taught me is how law operates when its primary goal is serving big business, and opened my eyes to bold ideas and big gambles. Back in Italy, it gave me an edge. Those were the years when the euro was no longer a pipe dream, but a serious project, with Germany and France pushing for deeper economic and political integration, and Italy was elbowing to join the club. With the investment services marketing opening and the spree of privatizations underway, young banking and finance lawyers were, of course, in high demand. And they chose, as you said, an up-and-coming firm, Gianni Rigoni, and I'm still here. I would like, actually, the stunning offices in Rome was what hooked me first. If you ever in Rome, don't miss the chance to visit our meeting rooms in Palazzo del Drago. And then, of course, the beauty of Rome itself. Anyway, I'd really landed my dream job. Enough to say that in 1996, the firm was so small that every lawyer's name, trainees included, fit in a single column on the letterhead, which of course meant a lot of exposure and opportunity. The firm culture, work ethic, and profitability were fantastic, and much of the credit goes to Franco Gianni, one of the founding partners. But a model for what a mature law firm would look like came to me when I got to know English magic circle firms from the inside. When we opened the London office in 1998, I was asked to relocate. Soon after, we joined Linklaters and Alliance, a network of European firms, and moved into Linklater's 6th Street offices. At Linklaters, I encountered an unparalleled level of legal sophistication. The derivatives and structured finance groups were just phenomenal. But my greatest learning in those years didn't come actually from colleagues. It came from clients. Working with bankers at Lehman, JP Morgan, Goldman, and others, I learned their language and the way they think. If there is a single piece of advice I should give to young lawyers, it's actually this: find the smartest people, clients and colleagues, and stick to them, learn from them. Knowledge compounds. When Linklaters Alliance ended in 2004, we were on every major bank's panel in London, and we had more work that we could manage. And the next year, I was made partner. Meanwhile, London skyline was changing with the rise of a new high-tech skyscraper. The Gherkin actually was the first, and then, of course, she's greater, the Shard, the Wembley Stadium followed. They were beautiful, confident, futuristic, eco-friendly, but according to the critics, they were also ruthless buildings. Architecture that belongs nowhere and would feel equally at home in Dubai, Moscow, Shanghai, or New York, like the cosmopolitan professionals who occupied their floors. This, I think, brings us to 2008. Lehman collapse, the bailout, the global financial crisis, austerity, the deep public distrust of the political and financial establishment, the rise of populism. Political forces locked in bitter conflict, blaming globalization and free markets for all the world's problems. People bewitched by any politician or tech genius on social media who promised to tear down the system regardless of what would come next. The pendulum of history swinging violently. As someone said, it was the end of history. The problems, of course, were real. Neoliberal policies, where they had lifted millions from extreme poverty, especially in China and India, had fostered an unprecedented concentration of wealth among the elites and worsened the disparity between the global north and the global south. Manufacturing had shifted to low-wage countries like China, where the US and UK specialized in finance and services. As a result, working people in industrial areas such as Britain's Northeast or America's Rust Belt lost their job, their skills, their roots, and their identity. Entire community faced a bleak future. Post-2008, the mood darkened in the square mile. Bankers and their advisors, once seen as the architect of progress, became symbols of inequality and greed. Lawyers had to ask themselves hard questions. Were we part of the problem? Did we play a role in enabling excessive risk-taking? Did all those tax schemes offshoring complex derivatives, those aggressive legal opinions on borderline structures contribute to derail the system? Before 2008, law school speeches ended with, tidy and rather harmless advice. Be passionate, dedicated, and humble. Focus on creating value for clients and for your firm. Think long term. After 2008, such speeches invariably closed with a bunch of uneasy and largely open questions. Should lawyers play a greater role in enforcing corporate accountability? Can lawyers do that? Should law firms change their business model to prioritize ethics over profits? Should students be actively trained by academia to be critical of the industry that they're going to serve? But these questions too sound increasingly rhetorical and out of touch. And this, I think, is because now this is an exceedingly difficult problem to address. First of all, there is no consensus on what really needs to be done to fix the system. Many argue that deregulation had let banks chase a short-term profit, piling up the risk on the system. They argue that only strict regulatory guidelines can temper capitalism excesses and align it with the public interest. I guess someone like Philip Wood would respond that we should let commercial law do its job and resolve our conflicts. And our best chance is just promote liberal democracy and the rule of law, and as universally accepted ideologies. That at the end, the regulation is not the answer. At the end, these discussions go back to the debate about capitalism ability or inability to correct itself, a debate that occupies economists at least since Karl Marx, and there is little hope that will be resolved in our lifetime. But the second issue, I think that economic incentives more than ever push market participants to follow the tide rather than resist it. Which brings me to the gloomy views of some of my friends who are into politics and philosophy, and argue that while we debate fixes, the system is already crumbling under our feet. That today's world would be so fractured that we might not be facing just a crisis of regulation, but a crisis of culture and civilization. That the linchpins of the system, liberal democracy and the rule of law, are already breaking. We would then be heading towards a chaotic world dominated by authoritarian regime, where the rule of law is trumped by the law of the ruler. From our offices in the city, we may not feel it because in a disrupted, chaotic world, opportunistic behaviors usually pay off. Some people can make a lot of money for themselves in today's world. Think of certain crypto entrepreneurs who manage to create money out of thin air and then make it disappear. The same goes for lawyers who can game the system. What can we say? I mean, if in 1995, with a bit of naivety, we could believe, like Pangloss in Voltaire's Candide, that we live in the best of all possible worlds, today there are strong incentives for us to focus on cultivating our little garden and forget about the world, like Candide himself at the end of the book. Meanwhile, the queues of refugees around the world and those outside the soup kitchen in our cities seem to grow longer and longer. Now, I apologize for closing on a rather negative and blue note. Perhaps we should just not listen to philosophers who are excessively pessimist. I hope actually that the next generation of lawyers in Queen Mary classroom will prove them wrong. And after all, if it's a revolution is what is needed, who can start it if not your young students? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Marco. I think it was a brilliant presentation. And then we will open also the floor to question and answers. So everyone can or raise the hand or write in the chat. If you write in the chat, I will then also read your question to Marco so that he has a chance, opportunity to answer. Generally saying, I think, yes, the final outlook of the economic world is not positive for sure. And I think also what we can see, especially in financial regulation, is a trigger towards deregulation in the US that then is continuing through the UK, but Europe still full of rules. And so in reality, this approach is something that also can raise question about competition, who is more competitive among those countries, and how we can essentially lure the attention of investors. And this is something that makes, of course, financial regulation no more a subject of regulation, but something that is more about markets, and so be competitive and being able to be innovators of the market. Something that we have seen also recently with China, DeepSeek, what happened in China with the new model that disrupted OpenAI and the valuation of NVIDIA company that then collapsed. So, of course, we live in a world, and I agree with you that, apart being pessimistic, is changing in a dramatic way, very different from the period of globalization, very different from that London that you were describing, where in reality markets they were living a moment of diversification of risk, and so cross-border operations and possibilities also, especially from law offices, to expand across the borders to bring new models. Because if I'm not wrong, even Gianni was bringing from the US mergers and acquisition, things that in Italy we were not even, aware of. And those are all innovators for us. But today to be innovators, it's even more difficult, more complex in a world where we go also towards artificial intelligence. But essentially, without taking off much time that we still have, actually 30 minutes, so it's a good moment for all the attendees to ask questions. And so I hope that there are questions for Marco and for his brilliant career, or if you have even question about the law firm Gianni Origoni, where he's working at, whatever, you would like to ask, is here and is happy to answer. Also about his experience, I don't know, I was studying at Queen Mary, what Queen Mary, I don't know, was giving him, enabling him in working towards his career, for example. Any question? You can also write in the chat. Maybe, I don't know, Domenico, do you have any question? Domenico is one of my students that is Italian, in this moment, in reality, is doing his LLM with us.
Thank you, Daniele. Can you hear me? I don't think you could see me because I believe my video is disabled, but that's fine. Yes, I do have a question, which is quite broad. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. Me too. I believe it was fantastic. And just to break the ice, I would ask you, Marco, if you would be keen to answer, what advice would you give to a young lawyers in this right moment in time to break in such a tight competitive market?
I think that the advice I would give from in order to not to change the world, but to look after your garden and make a career would be the same as we used to give before, and in particular what I mentioned. So really, when you start your career, identify the smart people you can learn from, stay close to them, and try to learn the language of your client and the basics of their business. This I think is really crucial. So if you do capital markets and fixed income, you should learn at least the basics of how you price a string of coupons or a swap. If you do, M&A, you should understand, be able to read a balance sheet even in a superficial way, without being, of course, an accountant, but so that you can really understand what's going on, because a lot of damage has actually been done in the past by lawyers who used to stick to the rules and the provisions, but would not make the effort to understand the business of their clients. So that I think would be a key piece of advice for anyone starting the career now. And I think that you said that it's competitive, which is true, has always probably been competitive, but I don't think we should not be actually scared about the competition now, because I think that if someone is really motivated and has the right mind frame now, has the same possibilities that I had 25 years ago. I think that that still people who are really cut for this job and are motivated are not so common, and therefore, if you are one of them, you have good chances to do well in any law firm. What is true is that, of course, the partnership path is longer, is not as predictable as it used to be, which is definitely a problem. So you need to have a long view, but I'm sure that you can have rewards now as in the past.
Thank you very much. If I may ask you another question, if the audience will allow me to do so.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so going towards a more kind of technical kind of problem that I'm facing at the moment. You know, having studied law in Italy, having moved to the UK, to London, doing, you know, trying to grasp my head around different concepts. I would ask you, how do you have navigated conflicting regulatory frameworks coming from a different jurisdictions, and which would be the best ways for you to tackle these divergences, of course, within debt restructuring or financial markets, different regulatory frameworks. Yeah.
Yeah, I must say that, of course, as I said, I spent almost the entire career in London. But even when I worked in Italy, the framework I used to work with was the English one.
The English one. Okay.
So from this point of view, I think that it didn't make much difference being an Italian lawyer or being in Italy or being here. Of course, there are differences, but if you think capital markets in Italy for a long time have been I mean, still they're English law governed. In banking, there is more difference. In private debt, sometimes you see Italian law governed instruments. There are, of course, the specificities of the regulatory specificities if you want, for example, to place instruments in Italy. But then whether you are here in London or you're in Italy, for my job is exactly the same.
The same.
So that does not make a difference. Italy has always been, from a regulatory perspective, from the offer of services and the deployment of instruments, a very peculiar jurisdiction, very different generally from the others. And this is something I realized very early, which is good for lawyers because they always need issue even in multi-jurisdiction offers where in other jurisdiction is a box ticking exercise. In Italy is always more problematic, and the issuers know that. And that's a very interesting point because now is a matter of much debate whether regulators have been too strict, and then they, we are seeing that most most MTN programs, for example, by Italian issuers have been issued out of from outside Italy, just because there was a strong feeling that Italian regulators were not sufficiently friendly, let's say, in their approach and business-like. On the other hand, I've seen that some of the battles that have been done by Consob and Bank of Italy throughout the year turned out to be really grounded. And I've seen also European regulators going back saying, okay, they were right. Of course, they're not business friendly. They're very cautious, but also I think based on the discussion that we made, if you've seen, the optimism of the city, of course, created a lot of value, but also had his risk and downside. And I think that Italian regulators are very much more conscious of these. Used to be more conscious of these potential risk than other regulators. So it's a very complex, I think, analysis to make, from a regulator's perspective, whether to be you want to attract business or you want to have a long-term view of the market and protect investors in your jurisdiction.
Thank you very much, Marco. I would leave the floor for others people to ask you questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Domenico. And in fact, we have other questions that they appeared in the chat. So there is Geraldine, then Pierluigi Barbarisi, and Anna Maria Fagetan. Actually, those questions are quite interconnected, so we can even connect all three together because it starts an idea how about regulating big tech in a similar fashion to financial services. And then Pierluigi, in fact, is adding, for example, what do you think also is the impact of the new technology that is AI at the end of the day on the legal profession? So how this not only impact, the market and big tech as companies, but also the legal profession, and how the legal profession is changing or adapting. Do we need to change essentially or to adapt to the new working environment? And Anna Maria, in fact, is always asking the same, essentially the impact of AI, this time more on banking and financial regulation. So we can split maybe into that AI, what impact for the profession, AI, what impact for financial services and banking in general.
AI on the profession, there is of course a lot of talking about it. I think that will be absolutely radical, will be transforming, and that actually young lawyers, as any profession, but lawyers as well, should learn to form their professionality around the ability to use AI. This will probably happen with also with doctors. So now you need I don't know how many years to form a doctor. Then someone who can use AI will probably be trained in a shorter time, and we change somehow his everything about the way they do the job. And the same will be with lawyers. I think that AI, I can only say general things that you are probably match your experience. Is quite extraordinary the level of sophistication. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I'm a late starter on AI, but I just tried to put an agreement asking in ChatGPT, asking, can you spot anything wrong? And actually came up with a very impressive and sophisticated answer. So I think that will definitely change, hopefully for the better, our work, because it will take care of many parts that maybe are not as exciting, such as reading whole contracts or a prospectus from beginning to the end, because we will be able to focus on certain bits. But absolutely, I think that AI will be transformative, and everyone from school should learn to use it to its best advantage. Of course, the reality is also that that law firms will not need to be staffed as heavily as they've been in the past, as other industries. But again, I think that I was honest when I said at the beginning that there are still opportunities for lawyers who have the right attitude and the right work ethic and approach. So we should not be overly concerned, in my view, about it. It will not that it will just be a couple of partners doing the job that now is done by 600 people law firm. Regulation is a big issue. I'm not into it, into the details of it. Maybe Daniele, you are more. I don't know if you studied it thoroughly. What I think is that it risks of being the classical situation where regulators are just lagging behind and keep lagging behind something that they don't dominate and don't understand. And therefore they tend to put constraints, guardrails, without knowing what they have actually, what they're facing, what they have to constrain, which I think that for regulators is the worst possible situation. On the other hand, I'm not so confident myself with the idea and comfortable myself with the idea of having total free reign to those developing these technologies, and then finding ourselves that there is no possible way to contain it when it's too late. So unfortunately, I cannot say anything really clever about this, but I'm also confident that no one can in this situation, probably, that everyone is just a bit puzzled.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I mean, in the sense that AI is a new financial innovation, and so we don't know what essentially are the developments, and it's very fast. But for sure, probably one thing that I would like to add is that essentially, I mean, the moment of DeepSeek has created in reality a systemic effect for the first time on the Magnificent Seven in the US. So Apple, Google, Amazon, and so on. And so this is already showing that speculation that maybe is not really regulated, because the only regulatory matter in speculation is short selling. That is regulated a bit everywhere. But speculation itself, the fact that an investor can go into the next big thing, this is something that is about the philosophy or the spirit of financial markets. And has always been like this since the beginning of the stock market in London, in Amsterdam, in the US, in New York. So that unchecked speculation that can create systemic effects, maybe in a world that is even faster, can create issues. And so maybe we might maybe find a way to regulate those speculative spirals in some way, that they can generate instability, market instability, but also take away the wealth from one nation to the other. Because what happened in NVIDIA is that all the investors then they diversified the portfolio, and NVIDIA lost in corporate valuation billions. So essentially that happened in a few seconds. It's not something, and also, I mean, we have seen in Silicon Valley Bank was a digital bank run just with a Twitter. So essentially, the technology can help us, even if we think about blockchain, is something that is used even by JP Morgan today to make payment faster, to use in reality tokenization of assets are all good things. So in reality, it's a good technology to be used and to make things cheaper. On the other hand, it depends on the ends where this technology, at the end of the day, it is delivered, it is used, and how it is used. So, for example, my colleague, we had the pleasure to host, essentially, I mean, he moved from Hong Kong, Douglas Arner, Professor Douglas Arner. Now we share the room together. And essentially, him is the main expert on fintech, and is proposing, for example, a risk-based model for AI, how we should regulate AI on a risk-based model. That at the end of the day, I mean, is similar to the development also of cryptocurrencies, crypto assets legislation in this country is on a risk-based. So in reality, they see if it is a utility token, if it is e-money, security token. So in reality, they differentiate the risk depending on the asset. And the same assets, they can change category. So this is a bit probably the future, even in accordance with Douglas Arner. But of course, no one can predict. Essentially, those things, they can change so fast that they need to change again, as Marco was saying, the model. So maybe the regulator is behind, was already behind in some movements, and can still be behind in others.
Yeah. And somehow, of course, I think that AI has the potential to very different from crypto, because the blockchain technology at the end, once you understand it and the topologies, is something that more or less is there. While crypto assets, while AI is really something that is very difficult for everyone.
Yes, of course. Yeah, even how they use data, how they train the model, all these things. Yes, even speaking with bankers. In fact, that I think is a good advice that sometimes works in every sector, from academia to the profession. Once you speak with professionals that are the market operators, that is where you learn the jargon, but you learn also how they think, what are the real issue of the industry, and maybe this is also, I think, what you wanted to say to our students or our alumni and everyone that is about, understanding the market from the market operator point of view. If you want to become a business lawyer, to think beyond the box, outside of the box, essentially.
Yeah.
Let me see if there is any other question. No, everyone is thanking you. There is, I think, Domenico. Yes, Domenico, if you want, you can unmute yourself. You can ask a question, yes.
Thank you very much to both. I just had another question for Marco. So I was thinking that, I was putting myself in your shoes. And so I've been practiced for so many years as a lawyer through different economic cycles. So all the ups and downs you mentioned, a few of them. I was wondering, within this current environment, so rising interest rates, geopolitical tensions, how has your approach to advising institutional client evolved throughout your career and, of course, depending on the specific issues happening?
Yeah. No, that's an interesting question because actually what happened is, that in the phase where the market was growing and everything seems to point in the right direction. Also, the career of lawyers was reasonably short here in London. They used to go to retire quite early. And when the financial crisis actually started and started, to be big problems, some firms called back lawyers from retirement who were the only one to have an experience of such a huge downturn. That, of course, was very different from the dot-com bubble. So I think that it's something very important throughout your career to have seen different things and gives you a completely different perspective. I tried to convey this idea in my presentation before, that I think that this over-optimism in a way paid off. A lot of people did very well in those years, but still is somehow a longer view, which some factor in the fact that there are always ups and downs is what lawyers and what clients should take. Of course, it is not our duty, I think, to cool off clients who are over enthusiastic. Sometimes, the reality of it is that we are just followers in this respect. But I think that the general environment whereby you have people who have seen the ups and downs and have a rather more detached approach to think is a healthy for the city. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I just wanted to have an overview from an experienced professional, having gone through many ups and downs. So yes, you did. Thank you very much. I don't have further questions, so if anyone else want to jump in, feel free. Thank you.
Thanks, Domenico. And then, Domenico is one of our students for this academic year in banking and finance, and he will join also, I think, the derivatives module that one of the session is led by Marco. So essentially, then you will have also the opportunity to meet Marco, to ask further question if you want.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So
Looking
yes,
forward to it.
absolutely. So I think we are almost very close to the time to end the event. So I just invite, we have 10 minutes. So if there is one last round of questions, otherwise, we can even call the day. It's not a problem because I think we have covered the majority of aspects. Any question from the audience? Further question? Yeah, I think there is the last question of Pierpaolo Albo that is asking to you, Marco, do you think there is room in Italian law firms labor market for young professionals that want to build an expertise around banking and financial regulation? is a market that could grow. So financial regulation is a market that is growing in Italy, and is saying thank you very much to you.
Absolutely. We have always, I mean, we kept hiring throughout the years, and we're always very keen on finding Italian lawyers with this specialization. There are some, but not as many, I think, as they used to be, for in London at least, for several reasons. But absolutely, yes, I think that regulation is not to get easier anytime soon. Italy will always have these peculiarities, so I think is an area where still I think you can do a decent living as a lawyer with specializing in that. It's not because it's my area of expertise. I truly think that is still a very remains a very important area. I think that there are some, of course, things have changed since 20 years ago. One of these is, of course, the profitability of a lot of deals and transactions where there is a lot of pressure on fees compared to what used to be. I remember that around 2000 for an opinion, you could really charge 10 times what you can do now. And the same goes for a lot of plain vanilla work. So it's not an area where on plain vanilla transaction you have a lot of margins. But of course there are still special situation, restructuring, complex transaction where all the world of high yield bonds and US bonds where the fees are still significant. So there are new areas now. There is also, as we said, the technology, which is a very growing area. Still, M&A and general corporate lawyers have a lot of opportunities, but banking and finance is certainly still among the areas where there are good opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marco. And I think with this last question, we can call the day. And I want to thank you especially for this presentation that was brilliant, and also I think very good idea to connect in reality your history, your professional career to Queen Mary, but Queen Mary also to the development of London in financial markets, and how all of this in reality has created in some way your professional background. Thank you also to the audience to be here and to join our first time Italian Voices. We will have others, so we will have other events in the coming months, and so I'm looking forward to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.